So stoked on this one.
Craveable Podcast, Episode 2, Factory versus Sustainable Farming.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, and welcome to the Craveable Podcast. We are your hosts, Katie and Ben, and the show is brought to you by Fossil Farms, where real matters. So today, Episode 2, welcome back, everyone. We're going to be diving into sustainable farming versus factory farming. Lots of details, info about them both, the differences, the challenges, and where Fossil Farms comes in on that ever-sliding scale. So Ben, do you want to take us in and kind of give us a high-scale definition of what the lovely factory farming is?
Yes, it's unfortunate I have to describe this, that it exists, but there's, almost 8 billion people on the planet, so in a way, some might argue a necessary evil, and we're here to argue probably literally the opposite. Factory farming does tend to go by a different name, and that industry is concentrated animal feeding operations. Isn't that a frou-frou way to say that you abuse and house animals in an unjust way just for their meat? But let's dive deeper into that, because Fossil Farms doesn't operate in that way. What we do is not factory farming. You're not going to go to our, Lancaster farms we work with for Duroc pigs and natural pigs and see them in pens that are barely big enough for the animal where they can't turn. You're not going to go to a beef farm or finishing farm from our local Harvest Angus beef program and see a, half-mile long pool of animal waste sitting open air, leaching into the water. You're not going to see animal abuse, where these animals are literally dying in their pens with nobody checking in on them. I mean, there is a hand that feeds these animals day in and day out. I always think of our duck farm, but I'll get deeper into that. And then, there's the right way to do things, which is sustainable farming, which I think is a little bit more than just being sustainable, because what is sustainable by definition? I mean, it's a goal for us that we have the ability to safely feed everybody on the planet regeneratively and have the planet not be stripped of all its resources. And this sounds all hippie and frou-frou, but at the end of the day, the meat that people are raising in factory farms is killing us. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately. I mean, do you want to talk about, the cesspools that are some of these pig farms in the country? Where do we want to start? We want to talk about the good things like the sustainability. I think we should talk about a little bit on the water usage and the waste and pollution that comes from some of the factory farms.
Yeah. I mean, before we get into that detail, just, the basic terminology of a factory farm, you touch on a lot of things, but the literal definition is that is a form of intensive animal agriculture designed to maximize profits while using as few resources as possible. And that says a lot. So, I mean, a lot of the high level negative points on factory farming is obviously the complete lack of care or concern for animal welfare, the extreme amount of environmental damage and degradation that is inherently a byproduct of that. And of course, all the hormones, steroids, and other stuff that's getting pumped into the animals, which then in turn is a part of the meat that we are consuming. And that's obviously very, very bad. So yeah, I mean, we can definitely start with water usage. I mean, I know one of the biggest problems there is the contamination. And like you said, with the animal waste and the water that gets contaminated, I mean, what's the percentage of natural bodies of water that are completely unusable in this country alone, just because of pollution? I mean, it's huge.
It's a huge number that I wrote down just for this. It's 68% of lakes, reservoirs, and ponds are too polluted for us to use. And that is primarily due to agriculture. I mean, that is insane. 68%. So even most pristine pools of water that you're looking at on your hikes are totally polluted because of agriculture. How could that be true? Because this issue is so prevalent. I mean, the process of raising animals is dirty. Like, there's a reason that, farmers are salt of the earth type people, because it's a pretty hands-on kind of dirty job. And with that comes a lot of waste and manure. I mean, you're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of animals on a single property that are, let's put it politely, using the restroom. I mean, they're creating manure that has to go somewhere, and they just pile it up, or they pile it up into a wastewater retention pond that's unlined, open to the air. I mean, there's birds literally migrating over these places, sitting in these pools of water, then flying all across the world. I mean, this problem seems like it is only case by case when you don't consider the extenuating factors of it affecting an ecosystem. And that ecosystem these days is global. I mean, even looking at the avian flu that we all went through. I mean, egg prices, am I right? Egg prices, guys. That's inherently due to avian flu. And those animals are sick and they're traveling across the country. And there's these farms that just don't have things in place to stop their animals from getting sick. Other than antibiotics, and you have to cull all these herds, and that's also waste. I mean, it's almost hard for me personally to stay on topic because so many things just jump into mind that are really gross. But like you said, I mean, it's not just the water usage in general for raising animals and raising crops and things like that. It's like cleaning out these pens, and then
100%.
You know, all the chemicals that go into it, and then this leaking into the groundwater, and that causing issues with your endocrine system, and then not being able to, you know, or you have pregnant women who are having issues with their babies. I mean, it's an all-encompassing issue. And there's a solution. Just do it the right way, right?
Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
And I know, I mean, again, with, you know, on the topic of the animal waste and how these factory farms manage it, I was reading a couple articles about just people in not even close neighboring to these factory farms and other small farmers near these factory farms. I mean, life is almost unbearable for them, you know, and a lot of these factory farmers, they kind of say, well, that's life on the farm. You know, never worked on a farm where you don't smell the animals, but it's completely different scale than that.
Right.
And these local farmers who have small natural operations, they're having trouble maintaining their operations because of all the pollution, the horrible runoff from these factory farms.
Yeah.
And there are residents that have genuine concerns that we want to move. We're never going to be able to sell our property because of this horrific permeating stench due to, like you said, just cesspools of animal waste. And one of the huge things that is different, and as you said, doing it right, and I think I would like to get into, you know, the true definition of sustainable farming, but one of the big, I mean, defining factors almost of sustainable farming is this natural cycle of raising animals versus the unsustainable cycle of factory farming. So in the natural cycle, you have animals grazing on open pasture, you have the plant life and the pasture feeding and nourishing the animals, and you have the animals via their manure feeding and nourishing the land. And it's a cycle that is meant to be as such, and it's natural. And it touches on the water problem in that with the ground and the plant life being nourished by the animals that are naturally grazing there, it's actually going to make the ground hold more water, retain more water. There's less runoff. And that entire messy, unnatural issue just gets resolved naturally. And in that cycle, that is what it's supposed to be.
Right.
Basically.
Crazy that it seems to work so easily. I mean, it's frustrating for us. Again, I think we touched on this in episode 1, is to see things done the right way and know that it's, you know, reproducible results. So basically a hypothesis that's been proven. So now we have science that backs the evidence that you can do things naturally and sustainably in a ecosystem that essentially sustains itself. And that's part of the natural part. Is so, like, you hear, like we talked about all natural in episode 1, where people picture this idea of what natural is. And that's why we have to really delegate what we mean in our definition of all natural.
Define it.
Yeah. So you have the true evolution of the planet. You have animals eating plants, then dying and sustaining those plants that feed the animals. It's a closed ecosystem. And that's what sustainable farms do. And even more so now, regenerative farming, which we're talking to our farms about doing, of really not doing it because it's the next cool thing, but because inevitably you're going to take all of the minerality out of your soil, all of the health aspects. I mean, I don't even know how to say the terms properly, but you're taking out what's in the soil that makes it able to raise products.
Yeah, removing the nutrients.
Yeah, removing the nutrients. Right. Exactly. I wish I found that 5 minutes ago.
So, if it's all right, I want to define sustainable farming and sustainability. And I am going to read my notes here because the definition I found that I loved on sustainable farming is a little wordy. So sustainable farming inherently is having an integrated system of plant and animal production practices that over the long term will fulfill human food needs, enhance environment quality and natural resource base, make the most efficient use of non-renewable resources, sustain the farmers economically, and improve quality of life for society as a whole. That touches on so many points and everything. And then sustainability, take out the farming portion, is generally a societal goal that relates to the ability of people to safely coexist on Earth over a long time. Don't we all want that? So, I mean, some of the positive points about sustainable farming, which we're touching on here, but, I love order, that like natural cycle versus the unsustainable. The plants feed the animals feed the land. I know a ton of our farmers, especially our wonderful partners in New Zealand, they literally, and most farmers, if you do any research that have sustainable farms, they call themselves grass farmers. They truly consider themselves grass farmers because if they focus on the grass, they focus on, the plant life and the soil and that environment and taking care of it and making sure it grows and it's healthy and it's not, eaten down entirely and not given a chance to regrow.
Right.
That in turn gives the animals this beautiful area to graze and renews the nutrients and the life of the land. And then I think you mentioned this in episode 1, about all natural versus commodity. And, when you're getting excited about our products, you're like, it's just better. It tastes better. It's more tender. It's more flavorful. It's just better. And it is. And that's something that, I think a lot of people, when they consider paying that extra $1 or $2 for the all natural, they're like, well, how much better can it be? And that's just one small piece of so many on why it's better to spend your money on that. But there's more nutrients in it.
It's healthier. It's not healthier. Yeah, it tastes better. And it's like we were talking about. I mean, all these things that people talk about in farming these days, the all natural, the organic, all the boxes that people try to check, that's marketing to consumers.
Oh, 100%.
That's people not being convinced because they don't know how it tastes. When you're looking at you look at a brick of ground beef, right? Do you have any idea how much better it might taste if it's organic or if it's grass-fed versus some store-bought commodity grain-fed who knows what? You literally do not know. And that's why we have these marketing terms. But then that gets obfuscated too. And that's not a real conversation. So I think they talked about this on one of our sales calls. We had sales reps who do sampling. When we sample, we're going to sample this product right next to the one that you're getting right now. Why? Because we're going to prove to you that it tastes better. Because me saying words is one thing. The proof is literally in the pudding, blood pudding, I guess, if you're a meat company or something like that. But you taste the difference. And it's all across the board better for you, better for the planet. I mean, the boxes that we check, to me, are cherries on top. You got 8 additional cherries on top of your chocolate cake now.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of cherries.
But I mean, what you said about labeling, I mean, just to prove that point. I mean, how many times have you seen articles out there in magazines or on the web saying, here's understanding the labels on your product.
Right.
Like there's literally guides out there for understanding what the hell you're purchasing and ingesting because all of the labels that we use as a country are so confusing and convoluted and half meaningless. And it's just
frustrating.
It's frustrating.
Annoying.
So I mean, this is not the most positive point, but I found some actual statistics on factory farms that touched me home. And, I just wanted to share some of those. And a lot of these are, you'll see going back to 2017, 2018, but the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA, estimates that there are roughly more than 450,000 confined animal operations in the U.S. And that actually only really counts for some of the bigger ones. And as of 2018, in the 2018 and the prior 4 decades before, the amount of those operations had increased 4-fold. So
It's insane.
in 4 decades, the amount of confined animal operations, aka factory farms, quintupled.
That
Is
is
that
correct.
a word?
Yeah, we nailed it.
Quintupled. And again,
Break out your
that's,
thesaurus,
well, yeah.
dear viewers.
And that's only counting the largest operation. So technically, to be a factory farm, I didn't write down the numbers here, but it doesn't even have to have that many animals themselves. It's just the way that you're
Right.
raising them.
Right.
And so that only counts the huge giants. And when you look at meat, I mean, about 99% of animals raised in the U.S. are factory farmed. 99%.
Everything in the grocery store.
Everything, except if we're supplying the grocery store.
And maybe a few other good eggs.
Yeah. And then the last one, which, I mean, this is pretty general and applies to a lot of the ingredients that we as a country use in our food production, but about 60% of the food that we consume and sell here in the US would be illegal to sell in Europe.
Correct.
Illegal because of the additives and the weird crap that we put in it. And a lot of that is how meat's raised as well. And so it really just, I think a lot of people, and even me at times, I mean, we talk about this and it's like, it's kind of a hard pill to swallow. It's hard to accept and be like, yeah, that's how it is.
Yeah.
Okay, accept it because it's real and do something to change it.
How are you not part of the problem?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? How do you, when you're a objectively morally good person who purchases based on those things in your mind, and you know that every single thing in the grocery store you technically shouldn't buy based on your moral reasoning, like 99% of all the meat, everything every other American is eating or across the globe is eating is like that. And then we wonder why people are getting sick like crazy. Why people are, it's not even a matter of people getting sick more frequently. It's the fact that we're not living as healthy as we can.
Mhm.
We don't, it's in a way we're ignorant to how good it could be, which I think is a shame because I'm a dreamer.
This is true. And I definitely agree. So, what's interesting about this topic, for me is that, and maybe I should have said this in episode 1 when we were doing our intros. So I used to be a vegetarian for about 5 years of my life. And that included, the end of that period was going into college. And, I came off vegetarianism at that time. Obviously I've always loved food, but it was hard to keep a healthy diet being a vegetarian with the options available to you in the college dining hall.
I bet.
But the reason I started that was for animal welfare reasons. I mean, I wasn't combing through PETA websites every day, but I had done some research and I was really disturbed and shocked. And I just didn't want to be a part of it. And I mean, I love nature and animals as much as the next person. I mean, I wouldn't say I take that to the extreme, but I was shook, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, this is disgusting. Like, I don't want to, and when we do regular visits to our farm partners and we see the whole process, we see the animals being raised, we see, the slaughtering process, we see all of it. And I've always thought that that's super important because, I mean, it's so basic consumerism, especially American culture, to separate the fact that this was a living animal, that it had a life, that it was killed to be put on your plate, and just be like, this is a delicious chicken franchise, know? And like, it's so important to understand the whole process. And for me, when I saw what factory farms are doing, I just said to myself, I can't. I mean, peanut butter and pasta as a diet's not a great alternative.
Right, yeah. So you have to find something like.
As a meat eater, I truly believe, and I think we all believe, and I know you believe, it's 100% your responsibility to acknowledge what happened to put that meat on your plate. And I can swear to you that these ducks and pigs and cows that we have physically seen at these farms are living a much, much, much better life than anything that comes out of a factory farm. And if people could just see that with their own eyes, I think that would itself be a reason to spend the extra $250 on your chicken breast.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But they're a working farm. You can't really have people, wandering on it. I mean, just being realistic, but that's the thing. People need to be part of the process. That's why people go to the farmer's market. They like talking to the producers. They like talking to the artisans that are passionate the same way we are. That's part of the experience, because instead of painting a fake picture of, pastoral life and this pig smiling at the sun in a field. Not how it works, by the way. They're probably wallowing in mud, FYI. But there's the idea of what the farm is, of what people are sold. They only see, like you were saying, the finished product. But the farms that we've been to, we went to visit a beef farm of ours from our local harvest program, and we didn't know until the end of the trip that it was a finishing farm. We were like, oh, we just thought that's where you're raising. He's like, no, we're finishing them here. And that field are mine. And I'm raising all of the feed that goes into these animals for us to finish them. Could be 3 months. Could be 9 months. You know why? Because we're not pumping them full of grain. We're not getting them to a certain weight within a certain time period. But
I love that about I haven't been on the tour of the local beef
but the duck farm, we should talk about that, because that's also the foie gras farm, and that is a hot topic. And there's a right way to do it. That's
true. We can touch on that. I did just want to say, though, about what you said about the beef farm, and I know we have a tour coming up, that it's a fantastic program, and they are really, they're local individual farms that are in the Northeast, and it's literally this guy who owns this farm. These are his cows, and we could even track on a week by week basis. Okay, this week our Angus beef came from Joe in Pennsylvania,
right?
And that's super cool. But yeah, let's talk about the duck farm, because I've been there a couple times. I think you have been, and that's a really great experience.
Great people. It's a great farm. We're talking about LaBelle Farms, Bella Bella Gourmet, up in the Hudson Valley. Really great partners for ours. Great people, like legitimately
they're amazing.
The nicest people, generational family, having owned it. A lot of the farms that we work with are generational. Mm-hmm. If you have somebody doing it the right way for a long time, it kind of sticks. Mm-hmm. That's a lesson for everybody listening. But the duck farm does produce foie gras. If you don't know what foie gras is, it is fatty duck liver. And essentially these ducks go through a process that was previously or still technically called force feeding. And they stick a tube down the duck's throat and they fill their stomach with feed until their handler can feel it getting to the top of their stomach by touching the esophagus. And then they are force fed, quote unquote, force fed the gravage for 2 weeks. I think 2 to 4 weeks, something like that. I don't remember the numbers exactly. And then when they're slaughtered, they take out the fatty liver, and it is like, a third of their body weight when it's done. But seeing the ducks handled properly, they're with the same woman in this case for the whole time that they're being fed. These ducks aren't running away. They're not trying, to not be force fed. They are literally chomping at the bit to get to it. Does that really speak to, the welfare of the whole thing?
Even you describing it, though, seems like mildly aggressive. Like,
it seems so aggressive. And then when you go there and you remember being in and seeing the ducks in the pens. Yeah. There's only a handful of ducks in each pen, and they are quiet as a mouse. Outside of those fans blowing to keep air circulating in the duck house, they are super quiet. They're very peaceful. They're not nipping at each other or squawking or afraid or anything. The handler comes in and they're just hanging out, literally super all natural. And then we got to see the adorable ducklings, and now they're doing chicken and some other products too. But there's this idea, because we use charged language like force feeding. The ducks are probably going to eat that much anyway.
Well, I wanted to say, the reason foie gras was discovered, because that's actually a process that happens in nature.
Right.
Ducks on an annual basis overeat a lot regularly for a period of time in order to fatten themselves up for winter. And I didn't come in with a history of foie gras under my belt, but I would venture to say that some Frenchmen didn't just say, let's shove a bunch of grain down this duck's throat and see what happens.
Right.
Probably a duck was killed in nature that had been gorging itself in preparation
and they
for the winter.
Yeah.
And when we have seen that, as you said, the ducks quite literally line up, and it's not like, I hate the tube down the throat thing, because technically it's true, but it doesn't even go that far. It seems so
aggressive, but it's really, you have to see it in person.
Yeah. And so there's a right, you said this, there's a right and a wrong way for literally everything. And it's, it's interesting and awakening to see things done the right way. And, I just think a lot of the population isn't aware of the small scale in which that's being done and the fact that it can be done.
Not for a lack of trying, though. And I do want to say one thing before we move from the duck farm. They will let you visit. They want you to visit. Yeah. They'll invite everybody up because they understand what surrounds the idea of foie gras and these duck farms. They want you to come see it because they have nothing to hide. They know that they're taking care of these animals. These animals are sustaining these families in the Hudson Valley. Why would they want to hurt them?
Exactly.
And because it's not for money, I can tell you that much.
Yeah. And I know, you mentioned this, it just kind of just came up with a thought in my head, but you talking about the beef farm brought it up. A lot of people are kind of stuck on the idea of grass-fed, grass-finished. And I think that's, and this is my personal opinion, but I think that that's great for certain products, but for the most part, and our grass-fed New Zealand Wagyu absolutely exploded my brain with this one, but for the most part, like, don't give me grass-fed, grass-finished beef. Like, I'm very much not interested in it. I have had nothing but bad experiences, except until the New Zealand
There's
Wagyu
some
came
exceptions.
into my life.
Yeah, there's always exceptions.
But I mean, the grain finish is, and especially with all natural animals, I mean, I'm not sure how anybody really expects 100% grass-fed product year-round that's pasture-raised, being that there are seasons.
Right.
I mean, animals have to eat, and that's what lends to marbling and tenderness and not a tough, rubber, chewy, terrible steak in your mouth. But what's great about a lot of our farm partners is that some of them are growing the grains themselves. A lot of them are purchasing different all vegetarian grains from local farms, and they're blending it themselves at the farm site, because our farm partners care literally as much, maybe if not more than we do, about having a hand in every part of the process and truly knowing, walking the walk, not just saying, it's pasture. Yeah, it's pasture raised. It's local grain. They blend it themselves. And even back to the water, I know that a lot of our smaller farms, they're using water from, springs and wells and natural sources of water that these larger farms wouldn't even be able to use based on the scale they need.
Right.
And that water is not only sourced naturally, but is then inherently going back into the ground. I mean, there's just, even with the water usage, because obviously tofu uses less water than beef to produce, period.
Right.
Don't ever try to argue that. There's even a right way to source and redistribute water in that case. And I just wanted to touch on that because you made me think of it.
We don't need to cut corners, I think, is the message here. But sustainable farming is getting really popular. I mean, there's certain brands that put their emphasis on their regenerative farming
which is basically sustainable farming.
Which is basically sustainable farming. It's a small part of the whole. And I wasn't really sure where I was going to go with it. It just is one of those passion things for us. There's a way that you can integrate these systems for everybody to eat right. It's not like we're not producing a ton or literally hundreds and hundreds of tons of meat this way. 99% of it is produced factory farming, but it doesn't need to be. I mean, the US isn't lacking in space. I mean, maybe that would affect some transport costs, but there is room for us to do it the right way. And then there's the economies of scale. The only reason it's cheaper to have commodity meats and do it the cheap way is because they do it at such a large scale. I mean, our pricing is really reasonable since we're working with a handful of small local farms that all get processed by one parent company. For instance, like Awful Road, they're processing down the street from us, and they have for years, and they moved some of their operations and farms in Pennsylvania to have the space, to do it the right way, because New Jersey doesn't have the space. Iowa's got the space. Idaho's got the space. The Dakotas, the Midwest, Ohio, everywhere there's room to do it the right way. We're choosing not to and polluting ourselves for the sake of profit. Doesn't that make you sick? It does for me. But that's okay because we're doing it the right way.
There is an option.
There is an option to just do it right. And it tastes so good. I can't help myself.
But I thought about something else that I think I might have touched on briefly in my definition of sustainable farming, but this is a massive part of it. And it's something I'll give our take on too. But a huge part of sustainable farming is making sure that the farmers and ranchers that raise these animals can continue to do so in the future.
Yeah, profitably.
Meaning they're not going to have 1 year's worth of harvest and sell it at a price that makes them go out of business next year. So we operate on a whole whole animal program. So, nose
Sometimes
to tail,
hogs.
nose to tail, horn to hoof. So, we don't just order 5,000 pounds of tenderloins. When we order our batches of product from our processors, we're accounting for every part of that animal because that is what is sustainable for the farmer. It is not sustainable for the farmer to give us 3,000 pounds of French racks and 4,000 pounds of tenderloins because guess what? Every animal only has 2 of each. And what are they going to do with the rest of the animal? So
Grind it? I hope not. Jeez,
Yeah,
that's a lot of burger.
so that's something that we do. And that's one way to help support these farmers because if the farmers don't have the wherewithal to continue to operate in the ways that they do year after year after year, that's not sustainable right off the bat. And so one of the ways that we and that people who do operate in the sustainable meat realm work is accounting for that whole animal, purchasing in whole animals and not just in the parts that, 5-star restaurants want, because taking care of those farmers is as much important as taking care of the animals.
Yeah.
And, I think you keep saying things that spark other things in my mind. But I think I said in the past to you, one of the biggest challenges is the affordability of some of these products. And I mean, I don't want to say it's out of anybody's control, but it's a problem that there are lower economy communities that simply cannot afford to purchase these products. That's a fact. That's not something we can change.
We're trying.
But
it's really hard.
But what can change that? And there's no doubt that there are families and groups and communities that these more expensive products are just simply out of reach for. And feeding your family is more important than buying a sustainably raised chicken breast every day of the damn week.
Right.
But if more people that do have that expendable dollar, and I'm talking you and me, I'm not talking billionaires and millionaires, although they should definitely be held accountable, make the decision to spend that extra dollar, the more that we grow these sustainable businesses, these sustainable farms, the sustainable movement, like you said, scale. Boom. And then it's a little less expensive. And then more and more people can get on board. And then we can finally, hopefully, start to turn our back on this horrible factory farming, intensive animal agriculture. Yum. Doesn't that sound good?
Right.
Operation.
It's about equity. I mean, the conversation of equity is in the social zeitgeist for the last, 5, 6, 7 years as a real topic that people finally understand. And I agree with you. And it's an unfortunate thing. I mean, yeah, we say a lot of positive things about fossil farms. We're in a niche insofar that a lot of the meat that we carry isn't equitable yet, but we want it to be in everybody's hands. And we talk about all the time about, as a meat company, we want people to eat less meat. Why? Because you should eat better meat. You don't need to eat a 12-ounce ribeye 4 nights a week or a bigger ribeye. 12 ounces isn't even the average. I think these days it's like 14 and up.
Don't eat a 16-ounce ribeye every day.
Right. But you can eat an 8-ounce piece of elk that's comparable, probably way more nutrient dense than that store-bought, select ribeye. Don't get me started on that. But we want people to understand that we want them to buy meat from us. Yeah, we're a company that are looking to sustain ourselves as well, but we want you to buy the right meat. If that means you're buying less meat, that's okay. Does that mean you're putting a smaller portion on your plate, chef? Yeah, that's okay. Does that mean we have to find a home for the bones and the organs and the trim at these programs? That's okay too, because then we sell to higher end pet food companies and raw feeding pet food companies. I mean, it is really challenging to get these animals into every hand that it needs to be for it to then bring the price point down for some equitability. But we're really trying. And that's the way of the world, unfortunately, is that the powers that be that run factory farms can afford to push the little guy out of the way. But we're 26 years strong. We're not going anywhere.
Exactly.
And we're going to keep doing it our way. Other people do it. And I think there is a large conversation being had right now, not just at this table, unironically, but in general, of people wanting to move away from factory farming.
Yeah. So, I mean, absolutely, Ben. I agree with everything you've said. So, I, in reflecting, it's hard to reflect on what you and I have learned so much about these two topics since, we've kind of been living it for years, but ever since I started at Fossil, I mean, the facts that I've learned year after year are staggering, and most of them we've covered, in this episode. But I really, it's my true hope that some of our wonderful listeners will have taken a couple points of information, learned a couple new things, maybe had a little knock on the head about why it's so important to spend that extra $250, because it means so much to the world, not just us. But I just hope it's been informative. I want to thank all of you guys for listening. Please, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, because we love that. And thank you so much for watching. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.
3, 2, 1, yeah!